Hey guys, so welcome back. We are going on to our next section, which is going to be over the midpoint formula and the distance formula. All right, both of these should be reviewed, but just a reminder, make sure you take notes. All right, remember, it doesn't matter if you come into class the next day and you know exactly what you're doing. I won't give you credit unless I see the notes. All right, so first we're going to talk about midpoint. All right, and midpoint is exactly what it sounds like. All right, it's where you find the middle of a line. All right, so you're looking for that point that's right in the middle. So what's going to be given to you is you're going to be given 2 points, all right, and they are typically going to be the endpoints of the line. And this is going to be super easy because all you have to do is plug and chug. Now our formula for midpoint is going to be x sub 1 plus x sub 2 over 2, comma, y sub 1 plus y sub 2 over 2. All right, the biggest thing here is to make sure you're adding your x's and dividing by 2, you're adding your y's and dividing by 2. All right, it doesn't matter which x comes first or which y comes first as long as the x's are together and the y's are together. All right, and all those mean are the x coordinate of your first point and the x coordinate of your second point. Y coordinate of your first point, y coordinate of your second point. So if we look at this first example where it says find the midpoint of xz, all right, we look at this line and we have 2 endpoints, those right there. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to label those points. So this is going to be my x sub 1 and my y sub 1. This is going to be my x sub 2, y sub 2. I know that's really tedious and it's annoying. Eventually you won't have to do that, and it'll be easy enough to where you just know what to plug in. Okay, and then I'm going to rewrite my formula, and I want you guys starting off the first few problems when you're practicing this, I want you writing the formula at the beginning, because all that's going to do is help you memorize it. And this is one of the formulas that's not going to be on your formula sheet for the end of course exam. Okay, you're going to have to memorize this one. All right, so now all I'm going to do is I'm going to plug in. So my x sub 1 was 2. My x sub 2 is 12 divided by 2. And then y sub 1 is 6. Y sub 2 is 0, so plus 0 over 2. And then I just simplify. So 12 plus 2 is 14. I still have that divided by 2, comma 6 over 2. And then that's going to end up giving me 7, comma 3. Okay, so what that's coming out with is the the point where the middle of the line should be. So if we graph this, all right, and remind you my line's not going to be perfect, but if I go over 7 and I go up 3, that's going to be right there. And we can look at that point and say, is that the middle of the line? If I would have ended up with a point that was like down here, we would have known that I would have messed up somewhere doing the math. Okay, but that's all you have to know how to do, and you can check it by graphing it. So the next example, find the midpoint of AB. Right, and the only difference here is I threw a few negatives in. So again, I'm going to rewrite the formula. X sub 1 plus x sub 2 over 2. Y sub 1 plus y sub 2 over 2. And then I'm going to plug in. So over here, if I label, I've got x sub 1, y sub 1, x sub 2, y sub 2. Okay, so my x sub 1 is negative 2, plus my x sub 2 is 5 over 2. My y sub 1 is 3, and my y sub 2 is a oh, that should be a negative 5. I don't know why that's not there. Okay, so that's a negative 5. So when I plug that in, I'm going to have 3 plus a negative 5. All right, and remember when we're adding a negative, that's really the same thing as just subtracting, right? So I can get rid of that plus sign. So then I simplify negative 2 plus 5. That's going to give me positive 3 over 2. And then I've got 3 minus 5, which is going to be negative 2 over 2. Now, 3 over 2 doesn't simplify. You can leave it as 3 over 2, or you can write it as 1.5. I don't care. I would prefer 3 over 2, so I'm going to leave it as that. And then negative 2 divided by 2 is going to give me negative 1. So then I graph that. So I go over 1.5. I go down 1. That's going to put me right about there. Does that look like the middle? Yes. All right, the last problem we're going to do with midpoint is one that instead of giving you 2 endpoints, all right, it's going to give me 1 endpoint and it's going to give me the midpoint, and it's asking me to find the other endpoint. Okay, so I'm still going to use the same formula. Okay, so I've got x sub 1 plus x sub 2 over 2, comma, y sub 1 plus y sub 2 over 2. All right, and that's going to give me the midpoint. Now I can plug my midpoint in. It tells me that it has a midpoint of 5, negative 5. So I've got 5, negative 5 equals, and here's where it gets tricky. So it only gives me one endpoint. So I can plug the 13 in for one of my x's, but I don't know my other x. Okay, I can plug the negative 4 in for one of the y's, but I don't know the other y. And I have to solve. So what I'm going to do is I know that whatever this value is right here, it's going to make this whole thing turn out to be 5. And the same is going to happen. This entire thing right here is going to turn out to be negative 5. So I'm going to make two separate equations. I'm going to have 13 plus x sub 2 over 2 equals 5. And then I'm going to have negative 4 plus y sub 2 over 2 equals negative 5. And I'm just going to solve those. So I'm going to multiply by 2 on both sides. So I'm going to get 13 plus x equals 10. Subtract 13 from both sides. I'm going to get x sub 2 equals negative 3. Okay, so that gave me the x value of whatever my other endpoint is, that endpoint. Okay, and then I'm going to do the same thing for this equation. Multiply by 2 on both sides. So negative 4 plus y equals negative 10. Add 4 to both sides. So I'm going to get y sub 2 equals negative 6. All right, and then I put that together. So my final answer is my x is negative 3 and my y is negative 6. Boom. That's the other endpoint. All right. Last thing we're going to go over is going to be the distance formula. I think I've got 2 examples on this one. Again, these should be relatively easy as long as you memorize the equation, all right, because all you're doing is plugging and chugging. So our formula for distance is the square root of x sub 2 minus x sub 1 squared plus y sub 2 minus y sub 1 squared. All of that's under the square root. Okay, it looks really complicated, but it's not. All right, so I'm going to go in here and I'm going to label just like I did before. So x sub 1, y sub 1, x sub 2. Y sub 2. Okay, and I'm going to plug in. So again, I want us rewriting that formula first. Okay, so I'm going to have x sub 2 minus x sub 1 squared plus y sub 2 minus y sub 1 squared. So I'm going to have the square root of 1 minus negative 3 squared plus 7 minus 4 squared. Now, here's the tricky part. It does not matter if you start with the x sub 1 or you start with the x sub 2. But whichever point I start with on my x's, I have to start with that one on my y's. So because I started with the 1 here, I had to start with the 7. If I would have started with the 3, I would have had to start with the 4. Okay, and then all you have to do is go through and simplify. And honestly, your calculator will do most of this for you. So remember, when you subtract a negative, that's really like adding. Okay, so I'm going to do what's in the parentheses first. So I've got 1 plus 3 squared plus, and then 7 minus 4. Oh, why did I not change that to a 4? Okay, so 1 plus 3 is 4. Plus 7 minus 4 is going to be 3, and we've got that squared. Simplify down even more. 4 squared is 16. 3 squared is 9. When I simplify that, 16 plus 9 is 25. The square root of 25 is 5. That's your final answer. Okay? Now, if this right here would have came out to a number you can't take the square root of. So numbers you can take the square root of are 1, 4, 9, 16, 25, 36, 49, and it keeps going, right? Say it would have turned out to be 2. You can't take the square root of 2. I would have just left it as the square root of 2, and you're done. So your answer would have been right here. Okay? So this next example we're going to look at, how far is 0.7 comma 2 from the origin? So when you look at the question originally, it looks like you've only got 1 point, right? But then if we look at this, we know the origin is at 0, 0. So that's our second point. So this problem is expecting us to understand, okay, the origin is represented by 0, 0. Make sure you plug that in. So then I do exactly what I did on the last problem. So I've got x sub 1, or x sub 2 minus x sub 1 squared plus y sub 2 minus y sub 1 squared. All right, and then I'm going to go through. So this is my x sub 1, this is my y sub 1, x sub 2, y sub 2, and I'm going to start plugging in. So my x sub 2 is 0, so I've got 0 minus 7 squared plus my y sub 2 is 0 minus 2 squared. And then I simplify. I do what's inside the parentheses first. So remember PEMDAS. Okay, so 0 minus 7 is negative 7 plus 0 minus 2 is negative 2 squared. Remember, if I'm going too fast or if you can't write this quickly, since you should be taking notes, make sure you pause the video to get all of these steps down. That way you understand where the numbers came from. All right, negative 7 squared. Remember, when we square a negative, it becomes positive because you're really doing negative 7 times negative 7. So that's going to become positive 49 plus my negative 2 squared is going to become positive 4. All right, so this simplifies to the square root of 53. Yep. All right, and if we go back and we look at that list that we just made up here, what came after 49? It was 64, right? So this was 1 squared, 2 squared, 3, 4, 5, 6. So 7 squared is 49, 8 squared is 64. Can you take the square root of 53? No. You're going to get a long decimal. It's going to be 7 point a bunch of stuff. You don't want that. I want you stopping here. That right there is your answer. Okay, no need to simplify it, no need to do anything else. All right, so make sure when you come into class tomorrow that you have this formula right here for the distance formula, and you have, scroll up, this formula right here for the midpoint. All right, eventually you will need to memorize that. I'll give you about 2, maybe 3 days, but when you take your test, I will not give it to you because it's not going to be on the end of course test. All right, so make sure you have notes. If you miss anything, go back, rewatch it if you don't understand it. All right, and we will do an activity in class tomorrow.